we can see. So I will ask you at a point to be able to share screen and upload my slide. And then I will discuss more on the issue of internal waters, particularly port state jurisdiction, and what do we have in internal waters. So when we refer to the law of the sea, the basic framework is a treaty. The treaty is called the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So this UN Convention on the Law of the Sea was adopted in 1982. Almost 40, now it's 41 years old, this convention, which was adopted in New York. Now it has almost, I think it has 169 parties, including the European Union. So it is 168 states plus the European Union. So out of the 193 member states of the United Nations, the majority, the overwhelming majority, are signatories to this particular convention. However, also this convention is what we call reflecting customary international law. So there is, in international law, there are two basic sources, the treaties and customary international law. So for states non-parties to the UNCLOS, for example, United States, Turkey, Libya, Colombia and other states, the relevant legal framework is customary international law, which is, in terms of substance, doesn't make any difference. For example, I'm going to the Greek-Turkish relations. I was reading the newspaper like the last Sunday or the previous Sunday, and they were saying that Greece and Turkey should agree on the applicable framework if they want to go to the Hague to resolve their maritime delimitation. This is nonsense. I'm sorry to use this word, in the sense that there is, the legal framework is customary international law, right? So we don't need to agree on something because there is a legal framework that's applicable there. So what we're going to discuss and what we're going to see today, UNCLOS and the basic provision of UNCLOS are not only binding upon parties, signatories to the convention, but the substance of the convention also is binding as customary international law other states like Turkey or United States. So before UNCLOS, of course, there was not there was not like a revolution. UNCLOS has built upon other previous treaties, like the 1958 conventions in Geneva on several topics of the law of the sea. For example, what is the territorial sea, what is continental shelf, what is the regime of the high seas, and UNCLOS was actually a comprehensive convention, which took on board all the previous conventions, in addition customary international law. And the law of the sea is very old. It starts from Lex Rhodie back in the before Christ era, when in the ancient Greek cities there was a regulation of commerce among the Greek cities. We had also in the medieval period, and also later on we had customary laws regarding navigation, laws of war at sea. We had laws on piracy. Piracy is a very old profession, right? So we had specific rules applicable to the seas, but we didn't have any comprehensive convention. And usually, it is when we speak about the law of the sea, we have to make two caveats. The first one is that we are referring to the law of the sea in times of peace, not in times of war. So when there is war, for example, here, let's say for happens today, there is read in the newspaper like 2 days ago that Ukraine sank by using a drone a Russian Coast Guard vessel or Russian vessel, right? This is something which is not an issue concerning law of the sea as such. but there's an issue concerning law of armed conflict at sea, what we used to call law of naval warfare. So when there is a conflict between two or more states, there's another legal regime that is triggered, its application is triggered, which is called law of naval warfare. And we separate, distinguish between belligerent vessels, neutral vessels, and when there are belligerent vessels, belligerent warships or other state vessels are legitimate military objectives. Okay, so this is something which has to do with, with the laws that are applicable to situations of war. Law of the sea is something which applies in times of peace. The second caveat is what we, and some people do conflate, is they conflate law of the sea with maritime law. So when I was, like you saying, I was saying to friends when I was, finished my PhD, and they were asking me, so what is your theme? And I was saying I'm doing law of the sea, and the first reaction is, oh, you must be very rich. I said, why? Because you're doing maritime law, and Greeks are they have their own ships and so on and so forth. The answer is no. I'm not doing maritime law. I'm not doing this kind of ship insurance, maritime insurance, or charter party agreements between regulating private transactions at sea. What we're doing, which is not very profiting, is actually discussing and exploring the illegal relations between states. So law of the sea has to do with states and not private actors. Private actors are part of the game. For example, when we discuss later on, will you see high seas, and we'll see about freedom of navigation, you will see that freedom of navigation is the main user is not the state but the vessel, the ship, right? However, the private relations are something which has to do with maritime law and not with law of the sea. So law of the sea has to do with laws governing peacetime relations between states. And the main issue of the law of the sea is the allocation of competence or jurisdiction among states. So the basic, the idea, the concept, the rationale behind the law of the sea is how to make a compromise between, on the one hand, claims of states, coastal states, to exclusive use of the sea. What I mean by this, every coastal state, let's say Greece, right, wants to have more, and in the historical evolution of the law of the sea, states want to have more power closer to their coast, power to actually control navigation, to control inbound vessels, power to explore their natural resources, fisheries, hydrocarbons, now alternative energy resources. They want to have, and increasingly especially when technology was able to give, certain powers to states, they were very keen on expanding their jurisdiction, expanding their power they could exert to waters that were, far further from the coast, and to exclude other states from these uses. So this is coastal states always want to have more. So, for example, when we talk about continental shelf, you will see shortly, states want to have more resources of the seabed up to 350 nautical miles. This means around 600 kilometers from the source, right? On the other hand, maritime states and maritime powers want to have free seas, open seas. They want to have, access to further navigation, be this for private vessels like Greece. Greece is a major maritime power, right, in terms of commercial shipping, or be it for the war. So the majority of the maritime nations, they do not want closed seas; they want open seas, and they want to be able to navigate freely, very close to the shore of coastal states, right? Also, they won't have access to fisheries. They won't have access to resources. So, we have on the one hand exclusive claims of states, and on the other inclusive claims. So states want to be included in the pot, the sharing of the pot, in the resources of the seas and of the navigational routes. So what is the law of the sea? In essence, is the compromise between these two divergent, claims. On the one hand, exclusive claims, and on the other, inclusive claims. So the whole evolution, the evolution of the law of the sea from day one until today, when we're discussing about the law of the sea, is actually how to make a compromise between exclusive and inclusive claims. And this will be reflected and will be illustrated very shortly when I show you the maritime zones. So what is the evolution of the lawmaking when it comes to the law of the sea was, on the one hand, there was, we had, in 1958, we had 4 conventions adopted in Geneva, having to do with specific, issues, high seas, continental shelf, fisheries, and territorial sea, which actually codified the pre-existing custom to a certain extent, or progressively developed the then contemporary international law of the sea. The problem with this convention was twofold. The first problem is that the breadth of the territorial sea in Greek Egaliteras Zoni was not delimited. So we didn't know how much we could have, a territorial sea. The second problem was that it was like a Solomon slicing, this convention. It was, the states could, cherry pick and say, okay, I will sign up to this convention, or I will sign up to the other convention. For example, Greece signed up only in the Convention on Continental Shelf in 1972. So states had it was a fragmented kind of, bindingness of these treaties, participation in these treaties. So in 1973, we had the 3rd Conference of the Law of the Sea in New York. The final act was adopted in Jamaica, in Montego Bay. So some are referring to this convention as Convention of the Montego Bay. And there was, it was very interesting. It had 2, innovative ideas, tools. The first one was that this convention was a package deal. So if you're doing negotiations and if you want to become diplomats, it's an interesting, idea. But what we mean by package deal is that we put everything under the same package, and we say, until everything is agreed, nothing's agreed. So at the end of the like 4 conventions or 5 conventions, we have only one single instrument. And until we agree on the tiniest detail, nothing will be considered as agreed. The second innovative tool was that it was, the idea was that this would be adopted by consensus, meaning that there will be no voting. So we will discuss, we'll exhaust ourselves, they discussed for 9 years, with the view to adopting the final text by concession, not putting this to vote. This was pretty utopian, because Turkey, mainly US and other states, didn't like some provisions of the draft text. And therefore, at the end, this was put into vote. The majority, the overwhelming majority, agreed, with the exception of 4 states, Turkey, US, Colombia, and Israel, for different regions, each state. So the convention was adopted in 1982. It was entered into force with respect to the international seabed. So we had another protocol implementing agreement adopted in 1994 to unlock the deadlock, to actually try to somehow take into account the concerns of the developed states. So we had an amendment of the convention even before it enters into force. We had another implementing agreement in 1995 concerning strangling fish stocks or highly migratory species. So tuna, swordfish, all these very highly commercial fish stocks which migrate, they navigate, and they straddle between the 2 states. All these were, were regulated by this 1995 agreement. And very recently, in 2023, in June, there was a 3rd agreement with respect to biodiversity, marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So I don't want to belabor you with all details, but we have one convention. The main convention is UNCLOS, Convention Law of the Sea, 3 implementing agreements, and this convention is actually considered as the constitution of the oceans. It actually sets out the framework for any regulation of the oceans, the high seas, maritime waters. Also, it has an interesting Part 15, which has to do with compulsory or quasi-compulsory dispute settlement. In international law, the basic, the fundamental concept is that if you don't agree, if you don't consent, you cannot bring a case before international courts. It is in stark contrast to what happens in domestic law. If I have a problem with Chris, I will get Chris to the court. If Chris does not, if I make a criminal offense, I will call the police and I will file, application. In national law, this is not the case. If the other party, the state, is not in agreement, it doesn't consent, no international court will have jurisdiction. Okay. So in the context of the law of the sea and UNCLOS, this consent, which is a prerequisite to international adjudication, is granted pursuant to UNCLOS. So all state parties to UNCLOS have agreed by signing UNCLOS that if there is a dispute concerning the application of the convention, some tribunals will have jurisdiction. They can adjudicate the case. There are certain exceptions when, for example, Greece has opted to exclude disputes concerning maritime delimitation, or other exceptions concerning, let's say, fisheries or marine environment. So, it is an 85% of disputes under the law of the sea can be adjudicated by these tribunals, right? This is the main reason, for example, that the United States do not want to become a party. They're not very keen on international adjudication. So they do agree with the substance of the convention. I've been in many international UN meetings. US is always very, happy to cite UNCLOS provisions, in contrast to Turkey, for example, right? But they don't want to be party to the UNCLOS because they don't want to be, brought before international courts. Okay, so this is their own political view. In terms of this, for example, Greece, let's say, and France, if there's an issue with respect to, let's say, an arrest of a French fishing vessel, in theory, France can get us, let's say, to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea or an arbitral tribunal using the mechanism of UNCLOS. Okay, so this is a very important also tool that UNCLOS entails. Okay. So when we talk Law of the Sea, to wrap up, we talk about one single convention, UNCLOS, with 3 now implementing agreements. Also, there are other various, very specific matters are also regulated by other treaties. For example, when it comes to, let's say, terrorism at sea or drug trafficking, there are specific other United Nations treaties that apply, right? But the main framework is given by UNCLOS, and UNCLOS now, after 40 years of its life, is by the overwhelming majority of states and scholars considered as, and the Dutch Court of Justice, as reflective of custom international law. So we are on the safe ground when we refer to UNCLOS, to Law of the Sea, to refer to UNCLOS provisions. Any questions so far, or any feedback or any other views?
No.
Okay, good. So let me share my screen. I don't know if I can share my screen, right? Okay, thank you very much. So let me share my screen. No, I cannot share my screen. Can someone make me a presenter to share my screen.
Share screen.
So it says host disable participant screen sharing. So probably you must do something on your end. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay. So soon you will see my screen.
Okay.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you.
So let's see now, because it's a very technical issue, and I do acknowledge this. So let's have a picture, a diagram to discuss on what is the law of the sea, right? So the first thing we do in the law of the sea is that we draw what we call baselines. So baseline is this here, is the territorial sea baseline. So baseline is actually is the point at sea, at the coast, that we use to measure our maritime zones. So you will hear that Greece has 6 or 12 nautical miles of territorial sea measured from its baselines. It has, a state may have 200 nautical miles of exclusive economic zone. In Greece, Aos is very famous, right? And this is measured from the baseline, right? So every maritime zones of the state, the coastal state, is measured from the baseline. So the baseline is really instrumental, right, for the measurement and for the establishment of maritime zones. So the first thing that a state must do is to draw its baselines. Now, there are two ways to draw baselines. Either we can use the normal baseline, like Greece used to have up until 2020. So Greece used what we call the low tide, the low water line, along its coast. So if you are now in Kavala and you go to the sea, if weather permitting, you go to swim. At the moment that you put your feet on at sea, this is very practically speaking will be the baseline, right? Okay, this is one way to measure baselines. The other way to draw baselines is to use what we call the straight baseline system. Imagine you are in Norway. So if you have a picture of Norway, Norway has a lot of concave coastline, right, and many small islets called the fjords, Skejard along the coastline. So Norway was the first state to use artificial straight baselines, right, and to draw the baselines at the outer edge of these small islands. This is considered as lawful under the law of the sea. It is included under UNCLOS, Article 7. So many states have used this prerogative, make use of this prerogative, and and have drawn straight baselines, including, thank God, Greece in 2020. December 2020, Greece issued a presidential decree on the 28th of December of 2020, drawing straight baselines in the Ionian Sea and the Ionian Islands, from the north part of Corfu till Tenaro. So Greece has made this, has used this and taken advantage of this provision of UNCLOS and has drawn straight baselines. Now you will ask me the logical question: why we have not done this also for other parts of Greece? The obvious answer to this is look at our neighbors Turkey and the whole, Greek-Turkish difficulties, right? So it is something which Greece has, of course, reserved its right to do this in territory. So in the future, we can do this in Crete, we can do this in the continental Greece, in Evia or in Attica, but it is something which is a right of Greece. It can be exercised whenever Greece finds this, that it's in its interests. So the first thing we do, we draw a baseline. Now, the first maritime zone, before we'll discuss internal waters shortly, it is the territorial sea. So the first seaboard maritime zone is the territorial sea. In Greek, Αιγελίτιδα ζώνη, χωρικά ύδατα, χωρική θάλασσα. So we have there a territorial sea which is under UNCLOS and under custom international law is up to 12 nautical miles. Up to 12 nautical miles, okay. Which means it's around 20 kilometers, if you make the calculation. And in this maritime zone, you have sovereignty. What I mean by sovereignty, it is like your territory, it's like it's your territory, right? So it is like when you're speaking about what is the territory of Greece, you will say the territory of Greece includes the territorial sea, the seabed and subsoil of the territorial sea, and the super adjacent airspace, right? Now, the only limit that the UNCLOS sets is that the maximum limit should be 12 nautical miles, right? We cannot have 13 nautical miles. However, states may have less or may have different kind of territorial sea in different parts of its territory, like our states, Greece. So Greece has 6 nautical miles of territorial sea along its territory, with the exception, again, a big thank God, to the exception of Ionian Sea and Ionian Islands. So by the decree 4767 of 2021, January 2021, so like 2 years ago, 2 years and a half ago, Greece, for the first time ever, extended its territorial sea to 12 nautical miles, including the super-adjacent airspace, again in the Ionian Sea and Ionian Islands, right? So the whole Ionian Sea, Greece has a 12 nautical miles territorial sea. So Greece was the first time after 1947, after the Treaty of Paris, that Greece extended its sovereignty. We didn't have to make wars to extend our sovereignty, but we did extend our sovereignty by extending our territorial sea. Now, territorial sea, you have sovereignty, but this sovereignty is actually subject to the rights of other states, predominantly what we call the right of innocent passage. So the right of innocent passage is the right of the other states to navigate through our territorial sea without asking permission. And this is because other states, you remember the inclusive rights, want to have freedom of navigation, which is not freedom of navigation as such, but is a reflection, right? Another way, another manner to navigate through the territorial sea. So in the territorial sea of Greece, other states, be this major flag state powers like Marshall Islands, Panama, Liberia, but other states like France, Turkey, whatever, can pass through our territorial sea. Of course, by respecting certain requirements, by meeting certain requirements. It must be a navigation which is expeditious, continuous, and you must not engage in activities that they are considered as prejudicial to the peace and good order of the coastal state of Greece. Okay, for example, you cannot fish. You cannot say, oh, there's a nice group of sea breams, let's stop and fish, right? So you have to be respectful of the coastal state laws. But you have a right, the other states have a right to pass through the territorial sea. Okay. Now, Greece, as we said, it has 6 nautical miles of territorial sea in other parts of its territory, but in the Ionian Sea, it's 12 nautical miles. Now, territorial sea, you have it because you're a state, you're a coastal state. Okay. The 2 other zones that you can see in the diagram, which is the contiguous zone and the exclusive economic zones, are maritime zones that you must declare. That you have to declare. You're not actually presumed that you have them, but you must, by legislation, establish these maritime zones. The first one is the contiguous zone. You can see it from 12 nautical miles to 24 nautical miles. In this maritime zone, states may control navigation, may stop vessels, and may check the vessels for specific purpose. And the specific purpose is whether is to prevent or suppress any infringement of fiscal, immigration, sanitary, and customs laws and regulations. To put it very simply, if there's a vessel coming here, you can stop it as a coastal state, and you can say, okay, what are you having here? And you say, okay, I have a load of, let's say, TVs, televisions, right? And you check the vessel, and the vessel has not only television, but it has illicit tobacco, cigarettes, right? This is a classical customs violation. So you can prevent the vessel, stop the vessel, say, no, don't come to my ports. Or you may, if the vessel has left your ports, you may arrest this vessel. This maritime zones is dependent on a specific, actually, proclamation of the coastal state. Our nation, Greece, does not have a contiguous zone, has never proclaimed a contiguous zone, which in my view is unsatisfactory, because contiguous zone could have certain benefits for Greece, specifically when it comes to migration, because you can check vessels for not violating your immigration laws, right, which is a major issue in the Mediterranean Sea, as well as you can check vessels for customs violation, which is, it's really a lot of illegal products are actually shipped to Greece or from Greece in the Mediterranean Sea. Now, the second zone that you need to proclaim is the famous EEZ. I mean the famous because back in the 2010, you may remember, you're very young, the majority of you, that there was a big, obsession with AOS in Greek. Some were saying aositida or aosologia. You can even, whenever you go to a taxi driver, the taxi driver can easily tell you what is an AOS. It's very funny. And everybody knew what is AOS, what is the EEZ. It's not so easy. It's not so simple though. The EEZ, the exclusive economic zone, is a maritime zone you must proclaim, which could be up to 200 from the baseline. So it can be 188, maritime nautical miles long. And in these maritime zones, you have exclusive economic rights. And the rights pertain to fisheries, pertain to the natural resources of the seabed and subsoil, pertain to energy, offshore energy installations like wind farms, offshore installation to take advantage of currents or waves. So all these, new renewable energy resource, which is becoming very important for, specifically in the climate change era, you can have them by having an EEZ. On the other hand, other states can still preserve the freedoms of navigation, overflight. They can overflight here, and also they can lay submarine cables and pipelines here in the exclusive economic zone. So it is like we call it a sui generis zone. It's a zone that the coastal state has economic powers and rights, and the other states hold the major right of navigation. So they can navigate here, in the exclusive economic zone freely, because it is important for international commerce, right? Their interests. Greece did not have an EEZ until the 2020, when in September 2020 was very important for maritime, for lawless in Greece. We delimit our EEZ with Egypt. There was a partial delimitation with Egypt from the 26th meridian and up to 28th meridian. So this is a small, between Crete and Rhodes. So in this area, because we have delimited with Egypt, Greece, pursuant to Article 2 of the ratifying law of the Greece-Egypt EEZ agreement, proclaimed an EEZ. So Greece has a partial EEZ, in the southern of Crete, Kassos, Karpathos, and Rhodes, the western part of Rhodes. Now, I've asked people in the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Minister of Agriculture, and there's still, it's like we call a paper EZ. So I don't know if there have been any regulations when it comes to, now I've heard that there might be certain regulations with offshore wind farms or about fish stocks. So fisheries, for example, is regulated by EEZ, sorry, by the European Union. So also European Union has a saying in natural resources, living resources in the EEZ. However, EEZ comes with certain rights but also responsibilities. So, I mean, Greece as a state has to somehow also prescribe laws and regulation, must set in motion its administration with respect to the full exploitation of EEZ and the powers that law of the sea gives you in the EEZ. Now, you can see another zone, which is the continental shelf. This zone is along with the territorial sea, a maritime zone that you have by being a state. So you have it because you are a state. You have it, it's your sovereignty. It's prolonged to the seabed subsoil of this area. This was decided first time, it was done, the first state that did this was United States back in 1945. It was also included in the 1958 Geneva Convention on the continental shelf. But in the 1982, this had been developed further, and we have here this, continental shelf that actually a minimum to 200 nautical miles. So the EEZ and continental shelf, they can overlap. But also you can have what we call an outer continental shelf or extended continental shelf up to 350 nautical miles. And in this continental shelf, you have exclusive, and I underline the word exclusive, right of exploration and exploitation of the resources of this area, mainly hydrocarbons, natural gas, and oil. For example, you may have heard that Greece very recently has given licenses to ExxonMobil and the Hellenic Petroleum Company to make drillings, exploratory drillings and exploration, seismic and collect seismic data southern of Crete and southwestern of Crete. So this is done pursuant to the sovereign rights that Greece enjoys over. Okay, so this is, you don't have to proclaim an EEZ. If it has to do with hydrocarbons, it suffices that you have a continental shelf. Now, of course, the big elephant in the room is when it comes specifically to the Aegean Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean Sea is the limitation. So the full enjoyment of these rights is predicated upon the delimitation, maritime delimitation between the respective neighboring states, right? So Greece with Egypt has made a delimitation. Greece with Italy has delimited its areas. Greece with Albania, Greece with Libya, Greece with Turkey have not, or with Cyprus, right? If you can extend our maritime zones to Cyprus. So this is, still pending, and it's a major issue, maritime delimitation, but we cannot go into this because we don't have time, of course. It's a major, it's another seminar, right? Maritime delimitation. Now, this is the maritime zones of the coastal states are territorial sea, Copernicus zone, exclusive economic zone, and continental shelf. Seaward of the outer limit of the EEZ and continental shelf is the high seas, which is mare liberum, freedom of navigation, freedom of fisheries, everything, right? So there's no state can exert its sovereignty. There's no sovereignty in this area. There is it's a res communis usus. It's a maritime area that all states have freedoms, rights, mainly of navigation overflight. And the seabed is called the area where this is regulated by a specific, international organization, the International Seabed Authority, of mineral resources in this area. So this is the panorama, of the maritime zones of the law of the sea. Okay. Now I have 50 minutes just to give you a snapshot of what is internal waters. Okay. First I'm going to leave 5 minutes for questions. You see here the territorial sea baseline, right? Imagine that we have here islands, and imagine we have here islands, let's say in the Ionian Sea, like Lefkada, Zakynthos, Zande, and other small islands. So Greece, by having a straight baselines, there is a certain maritime zone, maritime waters, that they are landward of the baseline, right? So you are the coastline of let's say the continental, the western continental Greece, and you want to go to Lefkada or you want to go to Zakynthos. These waters are not anymore territorial sea, but they are internal waters, esoteric islands. They are waters that they are landward of the baseline. Okay. And these waters under the law of the sea are assimilated to the territory of the coastal state. So it is like being in the territory of the state. Now, two things on this. Firstly is access. So who has access to these waters? Now, UNCLOS, the convention, provides for the following. It says that then when we like Greece, when there was when it had how we call natural baseline, so not straight baseline beforehand, and it extends, it uses the straight baseline system. If there was a right of innocent passage before, so if other states were using these maritime corridors to pass through, they do still have this right. So if other states, used to, by, international navigation purposes, pass through very close to the Greek territory in the Ionian Sea, in this particular zone, they may use this right, even if Greece has actually now enclosed these areas as internal waters. The exception to this is when it comes to bays, corpus. So if there is like a bay, let's say the bay of now in Laconia, right? Laconic Bay, which is closed by virtue of our recent legislation. No state, no other state vessel can come into the bay without Greece's permission. So you see here is a difference between straight baselines when there are certain, for example, concave coast or islands, or we have a bay, right, which is closed and you cannot anymore pass through. So access is regulated. And when it comes to ports, so there's a port, let's say I want to go to the port of Corfu, the port of Neapolis in Laconic Bay, or the port of whatever, I have to ask permission by the coastal state. Now, the permission is always required with one exemption under general international law, which is, guys, is distress. So distress means when a vessel is in danger because of weather condition or engine problems, or there are people on board of the vessel that they are in need of their serious risk of their lives. Think of the tragic events in June this year of the shipwreck of Pylos, right? So it's a vessel that people are in need of assistance. It can use this distress exception, and it can enter the port of the coastal state without its permission. That said, if the distress is alleviated, if there's no more risk of their lives, of course the vessel has to leave, right? And this is applicable also not only to maritime commercial vessels, private vessels, but also state vessels. So if there's a state vessel having an engine problem and it's in danger, in distress, it may call to a foreign state port, of course respecting all the laws and regulations of the coastal state. Now, distress aside, or if there's no other bilateral agreement, no vessel can call into my port, can berth into my port without permission. The second thing I want to discuss is jurisdiction in ports. So there is a vessel that comes to the port. That's called Port of Piraeus, right? and it has been given the permission of Greece. Now, for civil matters, so for example, of civil jurisdiction, it has a debt from previous shipping agreement, commercial agreement, then it's a matter of maritime law. Now, when it comes to criminal law, the basic concept is that, because you are, so for example, think of a Liberian vessel, oil tanker, in the port of Kavala. You're in Kavala right now. Kavala has a port, so it has entered Kavala port. So it is in Kavala port. It's Liberian, and there is and there are people are playing cards, on board of the vessel, and someone has a fight with the other, one of the other crew member. Usually, because it is a matter of you're in Kavala port, so you're in the territory of Greece. Greece can extend its laws and regulation to this event, right? So it is like, when you have a fight on the street here in Athens, right? So you can, the Coast Guard can arrest you, but this is not the case. What is customary for states to do is to abstain from, exercise their criminal jurisdiction unless there is, a serious danger is a prejudice to ports' good order, peace and security, or you are requested to intervene by either the master of the vessel or the port council. So for minor issues, for internal matters to the vessel, for example, if there's a disobedience of one seaman to its captain, the coastal state will not interfere. However, if there's a murder or there's a serious, problem, so then, of course, the coastal state, under also Greek legislation, the Coast Guard, which has competencies in the ports, may actually exercise its jurisdiction, right? So for criminal matters, even though you are the territory of the state, you are not, coastal states are not, usually they do not exercise the jurisdiction fully, and unless they are called upon to do so, or unless there is a big kind of event, right? Okay. Secondly, this is not applicable to state vessels, specifically warships and other state-owned or operated vessels. So if there's a foreign warship in Kavala, you cannot do anything. Why? Because this vessel enjoys immunities. So whatever happens on board of that vessel, even though it may be a criminal activity, drug trafficking or whatever, like a murder, you cannot step your foot on the vessel unless, of course, you are the commanding officer or the ambassador requests your interference. They have immunities, right? So even if you are, let's say, you are a Navy officer, that you go off the vessel in a bar and you pick up a fight or you do something wrong, what I will advise every Navy cadet is to run back to its vessel, right? Warship, if there is a problem in a foreign port. Why? Because nobody can arrest you on board of a foreign warship. So warships or state vessels enjoy immunities. Okay. So in port state jurisdiction in internal waters, it's really important to know what you can or you cannot do in ports. I will close by saying that specifically when it comes to maritime crime or the protection of maritime environment, it is usually states have usually they do try to exercise also control, port state control, for the reasons for the preservation of the protection of marine environment. For example, if there is like an oil spill on the high seas and the vessel falls in your port, which has caused the oil spill, the coastal state may arrest the vessel, may investigate the incident. When it comes to illegal fishing, you are, or other maritime activities, illicit activities, drug trafficking, maritime terrorism, usually the most powerful tool you have is what they call port state jurisdiction. So port states will inspect vessel, will put fines to the vessel, they will arrest people because the vessel is in your territory. So you can exercise your own, enforce your own laws. So port stage internal waters are, to close this and give the floor if you have any questions, is really important because you can exercise your control over vessels. Okay. So this is it was a 50 minutes, 55 minutes tour d'horizon of the law of the sea, UNCLOS, the maritime zones, what you can and cannot do. Let's close the PowerPoint. So it is internal water. So I hope I will give you I've given you like a snapshot. Of course, it's not I can't give you a full detailed analysis. It takes like we teach a semester, a full year of law of the sea. In Athens, I do teach a semester. So if you're interested in law of the sea, of course, you're very welcome to come join in any LLM masters that that I participate. So I'm open to questions if you have for the remainder of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex, for giving such a very short and yet insightful presentation. Yeah, it's working now? Sure, thank you. So thank you very much, Akis, for giving a fairly short but yet insightful presentation on the general law of the seas, and yet managing also to focus in such a short time on more specific aspects such as the maritime zones. Before we open the floor for discussion, if I just may ask you to share your PowerPoint presentation, your slides with me, send that to our emails, because we have a folder with the presentations of all presenters, and we try to gather them together, okay?
Okay, I had only one slide, but I have other presentations that I use in other contexts. I can send you these so students could also benefit from these presentations, okay? On the introduction of the law of the sea and other issues.
All right, okay. Yes, that'd be good, thank you. Good, great. So, any comments, questions, or concerns?
Thorough and clear.
I know it was after lunch, so after lunch it's always difficult to be very, very active. Hope you didn't sleep over your laptops.
Remember,
don't be shy. If you have any questions, really, I mean, I'm very happy to address. If not, I'm like, no problem at all. So I don't,
I suppose that the issue is very complicated, and probably we are a little bit confused in all these terms and ideas. Okay. But allow me to ask you something, coming back to the spirit of UNCLOS. I remember in 1981, I was a student studying at the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna, and in the last 6 months, we did a UN simulation, and the subject was the UNCLOS. That was 1 year before the signing. So, if I'm not wrong, I remember that the idea was, and the message was, the common heritage of mankind. Is it true that this idea initiating the new law of the seas is applicable to the area or to the area, or to the whole questions concerning the seabed and also the delimitation? Because these metal nodes, the question, the extension of North-South dialogue for exploiting the seabed in an effort to transfer also new technologies in third world countries, etc., etc. So this idea of common heritage of mankind is applicable to the whole idea, or it concerns only the deep sea or the ocean beds?
Yes, thank you, Ambassador, for your question, and I think it's a good compliment to what I've already said. Yes, you're right. The common head of mankind, or humankind, to be gender-free, it was like one of, I think, was a driving force for actually having the third conference of the law of the sea back in 1973. You're very right on this. It was part of the whole, negotiation. What will happen for the resources of the area, the international seabed? As you may recall in my diagram, this is the international seabed is seaward, is of the outer limits of the continental shelf. So after the 200 nautical miles of the continental shelf, you have the international seabed, or the Ethnis Vithos. Area under UNCLOS, what was the outcome of UNCLOS negotiations, and also of the first implementing agreement. This is governed by the common heads of mankind, meaning that no state has access to the resources of the seabed without requesting permission, license by the International Seabed Authority, which is an international organization established and functioning now in Jamaica, in Kingston. So this is the international organization that will give licenses to companies that want to do exploitation and exploration of the seabed, international seabed. Interestingly, in a year's time, almost maybe less than a year time, we'll have the first ever exploitation, drilling of the international seabed in the Pacific Ocean, in the Clipperton zone of Nauru, in the Southern Pacific. So this is the first time after so many years, because technology, that is required to go up to 5,000 meters depth and drill, it is very costful and very innovative, right? So it is not an easy task. So the idea of common heads of mankind played an important role for, us, specifically when it comes, as you rightly said, of the global south and the non-aligned movement, the G77, right? In actually putting forth their claims against developed states, which were more in favor of what we call first come, first served use of the resources areas. So whoever has the means to go and exploit the natural resources will have priority, which of course is not music to the ears of developing states, right, which don't have the capacity to do so, right? So this is something which is still also was underscored the whole discussion of the for the new treaty adopted in June 2023 with respect to marine biodiversity. So, which is the freedom of the high seas versus common heads of mankind, specifically when it comes to marine genetic resources, right? We can take explore from the high seas. So yes, you're right, and this is really important. Thank you for mentioning this. Any other question?
Other question?
Right, Akis, thank you. Can I ask you a somewhat more specific question? Perhaps
yes.
Some of us here are aware of the 2019 Turkish-Libyan memorandum. Its validity is contested, I believe, to say the least, given also Libya's troublesome political situation. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Is it that agreement standing somehow, and what's Greece's position on the matter?
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks, Chris, for this. It's very, very, very interesting question. So Greece's view is that this agreement is invalid because it was never ratified by the Libyan parliament. Secondly, it is illegal because it bluntly disregards any continental shelf or is it of Greek islands, and not small islands, but Crete, Carpathos, Kassos, Rhodes. So it is like it does not recognize that Greece islands has any maritime zones, right? But for the 6 nautical miles of the territorial sea. So Greece has deplored the sign of the signature of this agreement in all fora, specifically in the United Nations, with the permanent representative of Greece has sent a handful of letters to the Secretary General condemning this agreement. On the other hand, it's an agreement that is, it is signed between two states. These two states have actually sent this agreement to the United Nations. So they have deposited this agreement to the United Nations Secretariat. Between themselves, Libya and Turkey, this agreement stands, right? And under the law of treaties, does not have any effect, underline any effect to third states, as per all bilateral treaties. So if Greece makes an agreement with, let's say, France on certain issues, this agreement is binding only upon Greece and France, no other states. Similarly, Turkish-Libya Accord is not binding upon us, right? On the other hand, even though we do claim that this is an invalid agreement, we cannot invalidate ourselves. Under the law of treaties, only Libya can request the invalidation of this agreement because of a manifest violation of its internal law. So until Libya does so, which it's difficult, under the current circumstances, political circumstances, the treaty will be valid between the two respective states and no more, right? So it is what Greece has done is keeping, condemning this agreement, has made an agreement with Egypt on the same, geographical area, and we'll see what happens also with respect to the Greek-Libyan relations. Now, I was happy to hear that Greece sent an ambassador recently, Ambassador Garilidis. So it's good to have a better relationship with Libya in this regard. I hope I answered your question.
Questions? Okay. Do you allow me a second question?
Yeah, of course.
There is a debate in Greece and probably internationally concerning the question of different delimitation in various areas. For instance, different territorial waters in the Aegean Sea, the application of 12 nautical miles in the eastern area, Eastern Mediterranean, concerning Crete, Rhodes, and the other islands. Do we have, do countries have the right to do this different delimitation concerning their territorial waters, and also to reconsider on the basis of this different delimitation the sea zones? Or they don't have the right to do this separation, and they are obliged to go through the whole issue concerning Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean as a unique chapter?
Okay, thank you for your question. It's again, it's quite a complex question. So to be very as civil but also precise as possible, is that as a matter of principle, states can delimit their maritime zone as they may see fit. So you can use different breadth of territorial sea in various parts of your territory. So you're not obliged somehow to have a specific, let's say, territorial sea, breadth in all your territory, in the entirety of your territory. Also, you may, proclaim an EEZ in Western Greece and not proclaim an EEZ in Eastern Greece. You're not. It's up to you. It's up to the sovereignty of each state. Now, when it comes to the limitation, so the limitation involves a second state, so it's not a unilateral issue, it's something which you have to agree with other states. You can either, make a treaty, like we did with Italy and Egypt, or you can, try to go to the court, to the International Court of Justice. For example, Greece and Turkey now, they are discussing this potential. It's highly unlikely, but still it is something on the table, right? That is under discussion. So you can say that I will go to to the International Court of Justice to delimit. The first question is what you delimit. Are you going to delimit only the territorials, the EEZ, or continental shelf, or also the territorial sea? Second question is the area of delimitation. You will agree to have delimit all your maritime zones, or you to delimit only part of your overlapping entitlements, right? So it's not easy to agree on this. So what is that, you know, if we go to the limit, you must delimit the whole maritime zones, including the Aegean Sea and Eastern Mediterranean Sea. But before we do this, we have to have established our territorial sea as we may see fit. So what I mean by this, if we want to have a 12 nautical miles territorial sea, we must do it before go to the court. Because if you go to the court, then we cannot unilaterally extend our territorial sea in areas where Turkey will have been granted, for example, rights. Okay. So if you want to have a 12 nautical miles territorial sea, we must do this before we go to the International Court of Justice. Okay. If we go to the International Court of Justice, we have to accept its decision, judgment, right? Which will mean depends. Personally, I'm always in favor of international law. I teach international law, so I think like we are also law-abiding nation in Greece. So you know, I'm not afraid of having recourse to the ICJ, you know, to resolve our disputes. But it's a matter of it's a political issue rather than a legal issue whether to decide this. Thank you.
Concerning this map of Seville, what is the validity and are other countries obliged to respect what the European Union has created?
No, it's just a, you know, it is one agency of European Union that drew this map, or was it also a private one. They don't have any binding effect, and also, you know, it's interesting that EU doesn't have any competence over our sovereign waters, right? So, you know, the maritime delimitation, be it unilateral or bilateral, is always a sovereign issue. It's not a matter of EU competence, right? So there's no binding effect of this Seville map or whatever.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And see you soon. I hope.
Okay, Kavala, you have next time I will be also in prison. I
Next
haven't been
year
to
in
Kavala for
prison.
8 years. So